Boldwood presents and Boldwood present The Swim, written by Janet Hoggarth and read by Lizzie Attlee. If you don't become the ocean, you'll be seasick every day. Leonard Cohen. Chapter 1, Shakespeare Beach, 6th of July, 2023. I had essentially been dared into swimming the English Channel. That was the official story if anyone was curious enough to ask, though in reality it was only partly true. No one had actually forced me either. It wasn't like when Mum had suggested the Duke of Edinburgh Bronze Award as an after-school activity so she could have the run of the house, allowing her shabby affair with the school headmaster, greasy Mr. Kilburn, to continue under the radar. Known as Mr. Klingon behind his back, an overbearing, forehead cross-hatched with an unfortunate combination of pockmarks and wrinkles did him no favours. Children could be cruel. "All that fresh air will do you good. You could do with the exercise, Cordelia," Mum had said at the time, scanning a critical eye over me, having previously set the tone for the rest of my teenage years. The affair's emetic disclosure, and many other truths, was something I was only introduced to post-watershed teenage years, when Mum decided we were now officially friends, dissolving our tenuous mother-daughter contract, signed with invisible ink in the first place. I pondered my mottled feet, water pooling on the concrete, imagining how Stephen, my brother, felt, unable to recall life unencumbered with kids trampling through his carefully curated life, straddling bulging nappies, projectile vomiting, bringing home every bloody virus from the nursery petri dish. Rose-tinted pre-swim life had been laden with gloriously lazy Sundays with The Guardian and a creamy oat latte from Ruby's. Tramping along the rolling downs or across the iconic Seven Sisters with excitable Kevin, the Tiger Inn on a crisp autumnal afternoon anticipating the sun's dive below the partly dressed trees, the occasional dinner out, wine. Instead, life had taken on a distinctively regimented mantle. Laps in the pool at the Sovereign 3 times a week, bi-weekly weight training, and swimming in the biting sea come rain, shine, or indifferent cloud. I'd reluctantly taken up running under Desi's instruction, my hefty boobs pinned down like a couple of Just Stop Oil protesters inside the brutalist sports bra. The problem with running was it churned up my already delicate tummy. Only last week I'd been pounding the country lanes around Jevington when a number 2 threatened the status quo. Christ. Taking my chances inside a thick hedge just at the crucial moment, head hovering at an ungainly angle, avoiding losing an eye to the vicious hawthorn branches, I crouched and let go. "Morning?" an elderly gentleman called out, dog on a lead, giving me a nod. Where the Jaff had he sprung from? "Morning," I blustered, praying he was half-blind. We could easily have been exchanging pleasantries outside the post office, but then I unintentionally started peeing and watched in horror as it trickled out from under the hedge where the dog began lapping it up before wildly barking, clearly disgusted I'd marked my territory right under its very nose. I shivered. Why hadn't Cathy sounded the horn yet? The short swim to shore from Boudicca, a handsome 36-foot navy and white Dutch steel flybridge motor cruiser, had anaesthetised my skin. The shock robbing my breath when I hit the devilishly cold water. Being a lugubrious landlubber, it was a relief to leave the queasiness behind. Standing on the steps awaiting the signal, icy fingers jammed their way into my muscles like jackhammers. With no sun to toast the chilly sea breeze, my only protection, on top of the sunblock, was the unctuous layer of Vaseline spread liberally over my entire body by Desi. "You could have waxed, babe. It's like spreading butter on a gorilla." He paid particular attention to the chief chafe points of groin, armpits, and underneath my swimming costume straps, where a tiny green swim light was attached. A corresponding light was clipped onto my goggles strap like a docked dog's tail. Just like the gentle waves I was about to hurl myself into, the actual swim signalled a culmination of the journey, not the dawn. Like migrating birds, waves travel impressive distances, disturbing all matter of mariners while innocently stirring up schools of plastic jetsam and docile sea creatures in equal measure. Wisps of foam snapped through the damp air, waves breaking on the curved steel handrails, reminding me of the ones at the Lido. Kathy, the pilot, has suggested swimming to the steps, as they were more agreeable than picking my way over the vestigial slither of shingle like a crab walking on a Lego carpet. Historically, most swimmers began their channel attempts from either Shakespeare's Shore or Samphire Hoe further along the coast. But an hour before high tide, all that remained was a landscape of jagged rock armour protecting the adjacent railway line from rapidly approaching coastal erosion. Its eerie resemblance to the ramparts of an offshore prison brought to mind Escape from Alcatraz, with Clint Eastwood on his makeshift raft. The sharks, though, ugh. Do not think of sharks, Cordelia. They don't exist. Well, of course they existed, just hopefully not in the English Channel. But what if the Carcharodon carcharias mistakenly turned right at the Cape of Good Hope, aimlessly swimming north up the African west coast until it hit Europe, confused by the rapidly warming oceans, venturing into the narrow mouth of this very channel? Delirious with starvation, it would be primed to chomp down on any moving target it could lock its jaws onto. The Hollywood actor Richard Dreyfuss, shark expert Hooper in the film Jaws, burst into a rabid monologue inside my head, listing every shark's Latin name and their bite radius after examining a potential shark attack victim in the morgue. The pre-dawn blush bled into the clouds clotted above the terminal wall. Boudica bobbed 50 metres ahead, her lights throwing down a jittering glitter path. The translucent half-moon hung heavily in the sky, ready to slide off stage. Someone, maybe Desi, began jumping up and down on the stern, waving their arms. I scraped out an earplug. "You need to go!" The horn had been sounding the entire time in fierce competition with my clamouring heart. Ramming the plug back in, I picked my costume out of my bum, straightened my goggles, checked the lights, and crouched down, pressing my fingers against the rough concrete. Silent goodbye. I followed the steps into the water, jetsoning off once in waist-high. One stroke at a time, my mantra. Actually, Desi's mantra. He had stolen it from a retired channel swimming coach he discovered in his collection of books and open water podcasts. Accompanied by the smacking of hands slicing the surface and the faint gush of bubbles rushing past my ears after each exhale, I ploughed through the water like I had on countless occasions, my smooth red swimming-capped head trained like an exoet missile in Boudica's direction. It's just another swim. When I reached the boat's portside, muted cheering broke out on deck, so I raised my head, catching Desi twirling and clapping enthusiastically while Alan punched the air. Having successfully swum the channel to mark his 65th spin around the sun, Alan genuinely understood the untold trials of lying in wait. It was rather optimistic cheering before I'd even sprung out of the gate. Woeful Wabbit never won the race. Not that this was one. Boudica pursued me until we inched past the terminal wall in unison, a hulking ferry crowding the skyline ready to shuttle passengers choosing a more congenial passage to France. "The cliffs take an age to disappear, so you can feel like you're going nowhere," Alan warned last week after the usual Sunday swim. "I wouldn't look back. It's also best not to keep asking where you are or how long you've been going. Just keep your head down and swim. Hours have ways of wrapping themselves in knots in the channel. Proof we live in a matrix. Time is definitely in the eye of the beholder." Clearing the towering terminal wall, the sun finally breached the horizon on the left, casting an orange slick over the water's surface in a Game of Thrones cinematic panorama. I could just about determine the sandy sea floor while powering towards the Dover Straits and the inshore traffic zone, while below shoals of needle-like silvery fish darted between tendrils of light. Once the seabed disappeared, I knew I'd have to overthrow all nightmarish thoughts of sea monsters. Without warning, Mum's voice rang between my ears. "You never finish anything, Cordy." I'm not being mean, I'm just stating a fact. I hope you do it, I really do. Earlier, I'd woken to a cluster of well-wishing texts, one of them from Stephen, sent at midnight. Good luck today. I hope it goes well, and you prove the crone wrong. That would make me so proud. Though I'm proud already. I can't believe you're going to swim the channel. See you in Dover. Callie and the kids send their love. Go, Auntie, go! Aren't you scared of drowning? Stephen had asked a few weeks ago. I wasn't, but now I am. A family of waves caught me off guard, repeatedly slapping my cheeks, mouthfuls of seawater unavoidable. Glancing up, the sun pierced my goggles. A small white vessel cut ahead, generating enough swell to sway the little yellow rib roped to Boudicca's stern. On one of the more extensive sea swims, 9 hours, thrashed out in a continuous loop from the Langham Hotel to the pier on Eastbourne seafront, I'd been struck down by a monotonous chorus of Baby One More Time. By hour 6, Brittany had all but moved in, suitcases in the hall. But when the plangent opening bars of The Godfather's backroom piano and tremulous mandolin finally outplayed her. That was how memorising film plots to block torch songs from circling like buzzards was born. Hasten to say recounting Jaws was not on this tedium-bashing roll call. Alan had concurred. I replayed episodes from Fraser once I'd been going a couple of hours. I think I managed to stretch the one where Diane returns between 2 feeds trying to piece together everything in the right order. It was the only thing that worked to beat boredom and obsessing about the cold. That and treating the swim like a giant therapy session. You're trapped with yourself for 13+ hours. That's a lot of shit to face. After shoving my head in the sand for decades, perhaps this was an opportunity to pull on the tiger's whiskers. At the very least, I could lay some ghosts to rest. Practice makes patterns, not perfect, was another of Desi's borrowed swimming mantras. I was due my first feed 2 hours in today, but was arbitrarily forbidden from touching either boat or human, such miscreant behaviour invalidating the swim. We had worked out a system of plastic bottles tied to sturdy string filled with various sugary liquids, Desi or Alan hurling the line like fishermen hooking catch of the day. Memory surface of the one and only enforced morning service with Mum in the Tin Pot Cathedral, St Saviour's Baptist Church. A Bible story of the apostles facing another unsuccessful fishing expedition in the Sea of Galilee, until good old Jesus, multitasking as fisherman and king of expletives, respectively, suggests digging deep and throwing the net one last time. Would you believe it? They were rewarded with a mighty haul. It was as if he knew. This swim had more in common with religious zealotry than I cared to think about. Just the act alone of voluntarily plunging into freezing cold water in the deepest corner of winter reflects shades of John the Baptist. Head down, 4 strokes, breathe out, bubbles. Chapter 2. Singing in the Rain. A strict vetting system had been mandatory for this timetable of films I had to rewatch. For a start, I needed to be able to confidently recall their plots so that I wasn't just left staring hopelessly into the abyss. Being a woman of a certain age, 49, why weren't men ever described as a certain age? My short-term memory was shot. This meant I'd have to plunder the archives from an era where stories sank into the subliminal mind and settled there until called. The 80s and 90s were perfect then. I soon realised fictional tales alone weren't going to be enough to sate the gnawing boredom of the channel. Luckily, pertinent memories had attached themselves to these films like limpets, subplots, if you please. And that forced my hand to choose a chronological running order for the swim, allowing the past equal leverage. Most films throughout the 1980s had been discovered courtesy of BBC Sunday afternoon programme planners, occasionally Channel 4. ITV was frowned upon. Children, ITV is for the uneducated. If you've ever seen Tiswas, you'd understand. Stephen and I knew better than to ask how Mum had arrived at that conclusion if she'd never watched it. Button 3 on the television remained untuned, so when pressed, "Don't use the remote, it's lazy," the screen filled with snowy interference and a tantalising ghost ship of voices. Mum had refused to rent a VHS player in an endless battle to stave off what she called the dumbification of the masses. Society is sliding into the mire. Everyone's so idle, sitting around watching TV, piling on the pounds. Next, there'll be machines that suck fat out of your body instead of walking to the shops or doing Jane Fonda. Dad had bought the TV outright, an act of insurrection, its permanency hard to rail against. ITV needed to be pinned down in real time when Mum was at the afternoon service or on a Wednesday evening when she taught Slimnatics, a boisterous aerobics gymnastics hybrid, at the Tin Pot Cathedral. She had been hiring the Tin Pot Cathedral's hall for her Slimnastics class for 3 years and had managed to resist the calling of Jesus so far. Yet, once Pastor Michael, outrageously suave for a churchy person, took stewardship of the place, not only did she find herself attending church, but offered a new job that fitted around us. Pastor Michael, who preached in jeans, also happened to moonlight as Mr. French, manager of the local spa, and conceived the job title, Checkout Executive, just for her. Mum cajoled us only once into joining her at a service, but the smell of stale feet, eggy bleach, and burning dust from the pre-war electric heaters made Stephen projectile vomit all over Pastor Michael's lectern halfway through a sermon. Hallelujah. The day we watched Singing in the Rain was memorable, least of all because of the film itself, though it remains a firm favourite nearly 40 years later. June 1986. I was 11, nearly 12. Stephen almost 10. Mum had just left for her second bout of worship. Stephen was retuning Channel 3 when the doorbell rang. Mum had cautioned against answering the door whenever she was out. No matter what. I ignored the bell, watching the TV screen flicker onto a Purcell advert. Stephen stopped turning the tiny dial. The doorbell rang again. Then again. Burdened with being in charge, I crept into the hallway, feet squeaking along the dimpled, clear plastic protector shielding the swirly beige and mud-brown carpet. A man pressed his glasses against the rough, rolled glass panel at the top of the door. "Cordelia, is that you?" I shrank back against the banisters, a balustrade digging into my spine. "Cordy, it's me, Dad." Stephen joined me. "Let me in. I want to speak to you." "Dad," Stephen hissed. "Isn't he in Austria?" "No, Australia." I said that. Stephen eagerly made a move towards the door. "Mum didn't mention he was coming home," I whispered, restraining him like a boxing referee. "I don't think it's him, it just sounds like him." "I want to see," Stephen said in his outside voice. "Stephen, it's Dad. Let me in, will you?" I tightened my grip but couldn't gag him. "Cordelia won't let me." "Cordy, it's me. I have a key somewhere." At the sound of shuffling, I sprang towards the door, pulling the chain across. "How do we know it's you?" I asked in my best grown-up voice. "Who else would it be?" the voice said, straining in contained impatience. "Oh, I don't know. A robber? Strange Colin from Donington Crescent?" "Strange Colin can't talk," the voice pledged allegiance. "I know your mother has said not to open the door, but I'm here to say you can. It's okay." What would Jesus do? Not that Jesus was a particular role model. It was just something Mum said. Over the last few months since Dad had left for work in Australia, life had changed so subtly, like looking beyond my reflection in a mirror. Because of the opposing time zones, Dad was apparently asleep when we were awake and vice versa. Only Mum was allowed to talk to him. He'd not even said goodbye, just left a letter. On a more thorough inspection, the A's all sprouted a funny little squiggle as if trying to hook up onto the line above. just like Mum's did. Stephen had been properly upset, having been reduced to a minority in one fell swoop. "Stephen's now the man of the house," Dad had written in the letter. It wasn't like Dad to influence the intricate fabric of our lives, so that in his absence the whole place fell down like a badly hung curtain pole. It was more what he represented, a solid presence in the house, a backbone. After a trillionth time of asking Mum if we could talk to him, we gave up. Considerable clumps of hair started falling out on Stephen's pillow and in the bath, and the GP said it was stress-related alopecia. "Look, I'm sorry I just disappeared," Dad pleaded through the front door. "I didn't really have a choice. I promise it's me, I'll prove it. Cordelia's favourite chocolate is Cadbury's Buttons, and Stephen has a birthmark on his tummy shaped like the Isle of Wight." "It's him!" Stephen sang. "Let's go!" He ran to the door and scrambled with the chain, flinging the door wide. Dad wasn't an emotional man, his cards practically stapled to his chest, but he rewarded Stephen by scooping him up in his arms, holding on to him just that little bit too long. In the end, Stephen wriggled free. "Singing in the Rain starts in 10 minutes, Stephen said, looking between Dad and me. "Do you want to watch?" I'd wanted to see Singing in the Rain since catching the eponymous dance scene on the Best Of compilation programme on BBC Two. Films acted as cinematic escapism. Visceral emotions typically squashed down, flowed freely when watching a film. I was permitted to get upset at films, but not if I fell over in the playground, or if Mum scolded because I'd asked why her top was on back to front on returning from afternoon service. "It's rude to ask questions, Cordelia." Sitting on the sofa in the front room 15 minutes later, the TV blaring, a sashaying Lena, grating Gene Hagen, and a penguin-suited Don, slick Gene Kelly, arrive at the premiere of their latest film, The Royal Rascal. A glacial 2 months had passed since Dad had left. "When did you get back from Austria?" Stephen had asked as Lena broke her compulsory vow of silence, her fishwife voice setting everyone's teeth on edge. "I never went to Austria," Dad answered. "Australia, silly," I corrected. "I never went there either." Dad paused, his coffee cup suspended in front of his face. "Did your mother tell you that's where I was?" "No, you told us in a letter," Stephen explained. "You went there for work." "I didn't. Let me see this letter." He set his mug down on the wonky coffee table without a coaster, liquid slopping over the rim. Stephen jumped up, eyes still on the screen, briefly watching the pandemonium play out as Don left his premiere alone before running upstairs to his bedroom. "Well, where were you then?" I asked. Kathy, vivacious Debbie Reynolds, a new character, had inadvertently rescued Don in her car and was mercilessly teasing him about his commercial film career when serious actors like herself were solemnly treading the boards. Stephen reappeared brandishing the letter, thrusting it at Dad, who scanned it, his features creasing in concentration. "You know this is your mother's writing?" "Duh, yes." Stephen vehemently shook his head. Dad carefully placed the letter on the sofa next to me while Stephen sat on the floor in front as if awaiting a story. "Mum doesn't know I'm here. I promised her I'd give her 3 months to decide, but I can't wait any longer." "Decide what?" I asked, Kathy's pink-frilled can-can dancing filling the rapidly appearing cracks in our conversation. Dad opened his mouth, then closed with a sigh before speaking. "I've been living elsewhere for a while. Your mum wasn't happy." "No way." As a rule, this type of coveted information only traded between grown-ups. I flicked my eyes towards their black and white framed wedding picture on the sideboard, both posing for the camera on the steps of Brighton Registry Office, Dad's chunky glasses hogging the limelight, his young bride nervously glancing at the camera from underneath her perky veil, not quite smiling in her white, three-quarter-length ballerina dress with capped sleeves and a demure high neck. All the rage for 1970. Mum looked exactly like Elizabeth Taylor in National Velvet, if you covered up her more robust jaw with your finger and only considered her from the top lip and above. I rang twice a week, but she said you didn't want to speak to me. Anyway, none of it matters now. Your mother wanted it done this way. I was hoping. He shrugged, the realization slamming into me that he was disappointingly weak. It didn't matter that he resembled a mildly handsome professor and sold medical textbooks to shops and universities all over the south of England, once winning 1982 Salesman of the Year and a gold Parker pen with his name engraved on it. So what if he'd met George Michael at a publishing party, or that he could play The Saints Come Marching In with his armpit? But she's not unhappy, Stephen whispered, a single tear sliding down his reddening cheek. Pastor Michael made her laugh. Dad slowly brought his hand up to his mouth while Kathy hurled a cream pie, smacking Lena in the face. Missing supercilious Don. I poked Stephen before he let anything else slip, prompting more tears. Pastor Michael, Dad said, and slowly shook his head, patting Stephen like he was a dog. Later on, a key turned in the front door, just as bejeweled Lena was asked to sing live at the Dancing Cavalier premiere in front of a packed auditorium. I'm back! Mum was early. Stephen jumped up to meet her in the hallway. Dad's here! Meanwhile, Don, Cosmo, and RF gleefully hauled up the stage backdrop curtain, revealing a mic'd-up Kathy providing the mellifluous singing voice of lip-syncing Lena in Cyrano de Bergerac Deception. What do you mean your father's here? Mum's pinched voice bounced down the hallway. I leapt off the sofa, fumbling with the dial, hastily tuning out Don and Kathy's triumphant final duet, flipping to BBC Two and a black and white film I couldn't immediately place. Dad said you're lying, I announced, standing at the same time as him. Mum's eyebrows flinched. Good to see you're back from Australia, she responded. When did you arrive? Lois, they know. Children, he was in Australia, weren't you? Mum pursed her lips and raised her eyebrows, trying to prompt an agreement. No, I've been in Eltham with Tony from marketing. He let me stay in his spare room, but he needs it back for his brother's visit. Within the silence, a jaunty yet soulless zither escorted a woman on the TV as she wandered from an impersonal burial and into the final scene as what I now recognised as the third man. We need to talk on our own. Kids, do you want to go out and play? Mum clenched her hands, her eyes flickering towards the TV screen. No thanks, I said. I'd rather stay in. I'd rather you went out. Your dad and I need to chat. Mum stormed over to the TV and switched it off at the wall. You said we can't go out on Sunday unless it's to go to church. You said so, remember? Cordelia, don't disobey me. Out, now. Stephen edged towards the door. But it's against... Kids, outside. Dad eyed Mum warily, digging into his trouser pocket and pulling out his battered wallet. Here's a £5, don't spend it all at once. You've got half an hour, Stephen, you got your watch on? Stephen proudly waved his steel Casio on his wrist. I'll be here when you get back. My stomach whirled like a fairground waltzer. What on earth was going on? Chapter 3. The Channel. Alan's whistle tore through my childhood. Had 2 hours passed already? Film therapy definitely worked. I dropped my legs, treading water, sparkles dancing like birthday candles, the sea a smoothly iced cake. Wispy clouds scooted across the sun. I swam closer to the port side where Desi stood gripping a lassoed plastic water bottle, ready for casting over the brink. Alison, the observer, who I'd only met that morning, ate her first sandwich of the day, balancing her notebook on her knee. So far, so good. So far, no sharks. You ready? Alan shouted, the breeze whipping his voice up and over the starboard side. Earplugs cushioned all but the arterial thumping of blood. But I could still just about hear shouts, wind direction depending, and Alan's whistle. Desi launched the bottle into the air, landing it just beyond reach before dragging it, bouncing back towards me. I unscrewed the top like I had practiced 1,000,000 times during training swims, relaxed my throat and tipped my head back, swallowing all the Maxim, a sickly sweet sports drink, in less than 40 seconds, my record during training. Desi blew a kiss and lugged the empty bottle back on board. What if I need a poo? Or worse, get the squits? I'd been plagued by scatological apprehensions since booking my crossing slot. All that adrenaline might light a stick of dynamite down there. You know what my dodgy tummy's like. I wouldn't worry, Alan had assured me at the time. That part of your body shuts down. It's super important to urinate, and if you do need a poo, just do it. It'll make you swim faster, escaping a floater. Boudica's engine roared, rapidly resuming front call. I sprinted for 20 metres, outrunning the cold, eager to cramp on its way into my bones. I am warm. I am warm. I am warm. I read on a smug self-help influencer's Instagram post, one ought to articulate what one wanted rather than what one didn't. We should have been taught mindfulness at school. It might have helped ease the anxiety regarding Tracy Bates and her nest of vipers. Tracy is dead. Tracy is dead. Tracy is dead. You can't risk obsessing about failure, Desi had said last year once I'd accepted his challenge. Well, that's like a red rag to a bull. One of the open swimming podcasts suggests keeping a list next to your bed of what you are to remind yourself that you are more than just the swim. If the swim doesn't go your way, it can mean a big blow to one's self-esteem if you're attaching too much to it. An almost 48-year-old spinster with night sweats and an atrophied vagina is what I am. Bring it on. You're an animal lover and a dog mummy too. Don't forget poor Kevin. Bloody hell, Desi, it's not my sodding Tinder profile. No, that would read GSOH, keen cinephile, likes sex on first dates, red wine, and being taken from behind. Not in that order. Be specific, a Pinot Noir or Malbec. Not all red wine is created equal. Head down, 4 strokes. Breathe out. Bubbles. Chapter 4. Pattern off a plate. The day Mum handed us Dad's letter coincided with friends being unwelcome at home and subsequent ban on playdates elsewhere. Mum's deafness in the face of all protests forced me to hammer home my feelings by slamming my bedroom door so hard that the gilt frame print of Constable's The Hay Wain smashed onto the landing, the frame cracking on the right-hand corner. Mum ordered the permanently idle chip pan to be scraped out and cleaned as atonement. The lard had been squatting there since Lady Di married old Big Ears. A month later, my best friend Lydia moved to Scotland with her family, leaving me rudderless, making it difficult to forge new friendships after Mum's unreasonable clampdown. At school, adrift in a sea of kids without my own bestie, I unwittingly fell prey to Tracy Bates, who ruled our year with a mixture of fear and inane superiority due to her precocious prettiness. Why are you all sad? Is it 'cause your dad's run off? She feigned concern one break time as I skirted the edge of the playground, keeping out of harm's way. He's not run off, he's just away with work. He'll be back soon. Tracy pursed her lips and tilted her head to one side, in a jejune presaging of her future gossip-peddling self. That's not what my mum said. She said your mum and... But the bell rang and she pretended to zip her lip and waltzed back to her gang. What did you mean about my mum? I asked, following her into the classroom. Did someone say something? She exaggerated, looking round, pretending not to see me while her admirers giggled. You know nothing about my family, I said in a fit of misplaced bravery, nerves fluttering like a sparrow trapped in a chimney. Keep your nose out of my business. Or you'll do what? She said, spinning round to face me. I know more than you ever will. No, you don't. She stepped on my shoe and ground the ball of her foot into my toes. Your mum isn't as squeaky clean as you think she is. Seats, please, Mr. Hazelwood shouted. Stop chatting. Every day after that, she greeted me with, "How's your mum?" Or, "Heard any rumours?" Or, "Do you want to know what I know?" Before cackling like a hyena. Ignoring her became an Olympic sport. Summer holidays couldn't come quick enough. "You've had your tea then?" Mum said, letting me and Stephen back in, reaching for our empty chip wrappers. "Saves me the job. Your dad and I have something to say." After leaving the house, we had headed 2 roads over to Marino's, a famous purveyor of the finest fish and chips and deep-fried battered sausages. Trooping into the living room, dusty light fought its way through the smeared front bay windows, catching twirling motes on their way to smother the TV screen. Dad sat at the table in what was considered the dining room, separated from the living area by flimsy wooden Louvre doors in a late 70s identity crisis refurb. He pulled out 2 chairs either side of him and Mum sat opposite. "Kids, your mum and I have decided to separate." I knew we should have stayed behind. Stephen let out a howl. Dad put his arms loosely around his shoulder. "But your mum," Mum cleared her throat. "Both of us want to keep it quiet. Grandma and Grandpa will be sad and people talk. Let's keep it between us." Mum nodded firmly. "What if people ask where you are?" I said, tears creeping up my throat. "Have they so far?" Mum replied knowingly. "No. Oh, right." No one comes to the house and we were forbidden to visit anyone. Mum could have plugged leaks for MI5. "Exactly. It's not that hard to not talk about it, is it?" Mum said triumphantly. An old news story popped into my head. A local airline pilot had murdered his wife and dropped her body in a lake wrapped in an old roll of carpet, telling their only son she had gone to live with another man. In Australia? No one questioned it until her body was discovered by accident decades later when divers were searching for another missing person. I'd been fascinated that you could murder someone and no one would know. God would know. He knew everything. Stevens sniffled into his hands, setting me off. Dad was leaving for real. Tracy had been right. Mum got up and brought the kitchen roll, ripping off a square for each of us, kissing the top of our heads before sitting back down. "What if I don't want you to be separated?" Stephen said quietly, wiping his eyes with it. "Well, pretend that we aren't," Mum said, almost cheerily. "It's just a word. It's not final like divorce. We still care about each other. Dad's still your dad. You'll still see him. He's going to live in a flat nearby instead, but for now, he's in Australia, okay? You mustn't forget that part. I'll take you to see him every week." "Isn't that lying?" Stephen asked. "I thought that was one of the sins." "Not really," Mum swiftly replied. "I don't want to upset Grandpa and Grandma. They're happy as long as they think Dad's in Australia and we're still together, which we are, just not in the same house. I've said he's come home once a month, so it's plausible." "Can Dad stay for tea?" Stephen asked. "You've already eaten," Mum said. "Can he stay for pudding then?" I suggested, hoping for some long-lost Neapolitan ice cream hibernating in the freezer. As well as ITV, Mum lobbied against sugar, but we were sometimes allowed that or an Arctic roll. "What is there?" "Don't be greedy, Cordelia. You don't need pudding," she snipped. "Haven't you eaten enough already today? Honestly, you licked the pattern off a plate." Chapter 5. The Channel. I couldn't risk despair if the cliffs continued dictating the horizon, and if they'd shrunk to the depths of the loop-piled carpet, with nothing but endless sea before me. The swim might escalate into a Sisyphean task depending on other factors I had no control over. Weather, tidal currents, seasickness, jellyfish. All I could do was keep going, one stroke at a time. How many hours, though? 3? 4? I'd studied the channel's nautical charts like I'd been cramming for an exam, and gathered that we must be edging the southwest shipping lane. The constant influx of lolly-stick-sized tankers, cargo ships and ferries sloping across the distant horizon now arose from the left as bright and as large as floating cities, funnels belching clouds of smoke like fire-breathing dragons. The wash produced from some scooped me into cresting just below Boudicca's flybridge before throwing me down a waterslide, my stomach slapping the back of my throat. It had taken this long to pin down the perfect rhythm and win the latest skirmish between body and sea. So far, I'd battled the cold, winning by a negligible margin, distraction proving to be the key there, but swimming into the choppy shipping lane, my hard-earned groove slid away as easily as everyday words and people's names. I dipped into the roster, lining up the next film. It was a good one. They all were, but this one was special. Desi had introduced me to Roman Holiday, though technically it had been his mum. Only because it was Desi's all-time favourite. But before I could summon up sylph-like Audrey Hepburn as Princess Anne, burnt out from her extensive European tour, Kramer versus Kramer Q-barged. It wasn't even on the list. Had I watched this before or after Roman Holiday? Was this even allowed? I foolishly chuckled, almost taking in a lugful of water, rotating sideways to breathe, before facing down into the yawning depths. The seabed had disappeared quite some time ago. No sharks, no sharks, no sharks. Stop! Before I could block it, Jaws snapped its way into my head, with the clip of impudent Hooper standing on Amity Island, quayside, squaring up to a complacent Chief Brodie. Ecstatic after bounty hunters catch an impressively large shark, but not the shark, Brodie wrongly thinks his troubles are all over at roughly only a quarter of the way through the film. What did he think was going to fill the remaining hour and a half? Mermaid showcasing synchronised swimming skills with singing crabs bringing up the rear? Hooper knows otherwise. Of course, the shark was still out there, somewhere. Shadows played tricks below. I closed my eyes, the dull, fleshy glare from the sun's blazing halo radiating out in a triplicate against my irises. Head down, 4 strokes. Breathe out. Bubbles. Chapter 6. The summer of The Secret, so all-encompassing it was anointed with the definite article. We visited our grandparents, dreading Stephen might slip up no matter how much he was coached. "Selling books out of a suitcase, I presume?" Grandpa had sniffed, his only inquiry about Dad the entire visit. "Yes, he's in Australia," Stephen had cried proudly. I honestly wished they'd died instead of Dad's parents. My enduring memories of Granny and Grandad Franks were 2 faint grey ghosts and a tin of Fox's Glacier mints on a dark wood sideboard inside a gloomy cottage, windows as small as jam jars. Stephen and I pressed our dislike of Mum's parents deep into our bones. It was a blessing we only visited twice a year whilst the gardener was on holiday, staying in his modern 2-bed bungalow built at the bottom of their 1-acre garden. No one was allowed to stay in the big house because it was stuffed with an endless conveyor belt of precious antiques from Grandpa's dubious house-clearing business. "When are you going to get that girl's ears pinned back?" Grandma habitually asked before I'd even left the room. "All the better to hear you with, Grandmama." "Stop sucking your thumb, boy, or you'll end up with a mouthful of tombstones." "How are the children coping at state school?" But they loved their racehorse more than they loved their own daughter. Lady Madonna, who had yet to win a race, could have trampled through the house shitting on the Persian rugs, chomping on the aspidistra while they watched indulgently, cooing at her like she was their monstrous baby. "I suppose they need one daughter to be proud of," Mum had said when Grandma had rung to boast that Lester Piggott had patted the horse's flanks in the parade ring. Grandma unfailingly served stewed-to-death food, made by the home help, doling out measly portions to me and Mum. "A woman shouldn't let herself go."
Guests never helped themselves. "Stephen's finally grown. We were dreading that he was going to turn out to be a dwarf like old Uncle Geoffrey. Shame that his nose overtook his face."
Every visit, we walked barefoot over broken mirror. Whenever Grandpa and Grandma Simpson deigned to visit Eastbourne rather than stay at 17 Villas Road, they took a suite in the Grand Hotel along the seafront, arriving during term time, spending no more than the requisite 3 hours with us. Grandma and Grandpa always returned to the hotel the second Dad strolled through the door from work. After the secret was in place, the wedding photo remained on the sideboard, and Dad kindly donated a couple of old suits to hang in his side of the wardrobe, just in case. There were no friends to ask where he was, no visitors to feign that everything was as normal.
"Can we get a pet now Dad's left?"
I asked a few weeks into our new living arrangements, hoping the guilt of our broken home would somehow manifest into us being allowed to have some gerbils.
"No chance," Mum said. "Terry was more than enough of an experience for me, thank you very much."
Terry had been our first and only pet, a yellow and blue parrot, plugging the hole that I had previously filled by rescuing injured birds savaged by the next door's cat, and adopting worms, plopping them onto the back garden swing and gently pushing them in lieu of any furry creatures. The flower bed was accordingly littered with tiny crosses fashioned from twigs and garden twine, marking several dead thrushes, lovingly nursed inside old shoe boxes until they laid stiff and lifeless, eyes unblinking. Mum had inherited Terry from Grandpa after one of his piratical house clearances when the owner disappeared off to a care home.
"He's going to the knacker's yard otherwise," Mum had obliquely explained. "A parrot can't be any harder than a baby." Terry quickly settled into the lounge area in his brass cage like he'd always been holding court. At first, he'd try and scratch anyone in his vicinity, shoving his gnarly claws in visitors' faces from between the bars. Regardless, I was fond of him, striking up a rapport that revolved around administering snacks and tickling his downy blue head. Anticipating Mum would eventually agree to a gerbil, I volunteered to clean his cage and feed and water him. It was a 2-person job anyway, Mum grabbing him in a towel to prevent him blindly flying around the living room, seeking an open window. The first morning we took his cage cover off, he greeted us, "Hello, you ugly cunt."
"Terry!" Mum scolded him like a recalcitrant child.
"You can't say that."
And so it came to pass, Terry taught me the meatiest, and some might say the best, swear word, at the age of 8. He squawked it every morning and during John Craven's news round on the TV, and each time I fed him treats between bars, tenderly nibbling my fingers in a show of affection. Unfortunately, Mum had refused to divulge the word's meaning.
"Just ignore him and he'll stop. He doesn't mean it."
Until she found herself called into school after I had drawn a picture of Terry screeching it in a speech bubble.
"Where's Terry?" I cried after school the following afternoon, his cage conspicuously absent. Yes, he died. I think he missed old Mr. Humphrey. The vet said it was a broken heart. I'm sorry, darling." "By the way, Cordelia, you can't ever say that word again. It's the rudest, most dreadful word on the planet referring to a lady's foo-foo." I nodded, tears streaming, filing cunt away for future use. Every Saturday and the occasional Wednesday, Mum dropped us off at Dad's small 2-bed flat in Pevensey. We'd never had Dad all to ourselves before. The minute we arrived, he'd be ready with a packed lunch, and we'd head out on an adventure. Drusilla's Animal Park, Hastings Castle, or Eastbourne Beach, where he would use a garden shovel to dig holes so expansive they would draw a crowd. "Why do you keep your shovel in the boot?" Stephen asked once. "In case I ever need to bury a body." This was not the Dad we were used to. He let us stay late on the beach, never dragging us out of the water, threatening we wouldn't be allowed back if we didn't come now. I'd mess around for hours in the surf, diving into the waves with goggles on, watching as the breakers collapsed over themselves, froth curling like butter on the stony shore. The sea was always ready to play, and there was no need for anyone else. That was the beauty of it. Lying in the narrow single bed back at Dad's, happily tired from a whole day outside, I realised something that felt inherently against the very nature of life as I knew it. "What would you do if Dad moved back home?" I asked Stephen in the twilight of our tiny room. "He's not going to, is he?" Stephen said, suddenly distraught, his camp bed squeaking as he turned to look at me. "I know. I feel like that too. It's weird. When he lived with us, it was like he wasn't here. But now he's gone, we see more of him and he's better. I prefer it. I think all parents should live in separate houses. I don't want them to divorce, though. They might meet other people. I just want it to stay like this forever." Stephen had nodded enthusiastically. "Me too." In a house where the air was stuffed with secrets, I couldn't help but snoop. When Mum was at work, and I wasn't watching TV with Stephen, I'd dig. Not too much, because we'd seen an episode of Murder, She Wrote where Angela Lansbury had detected an extraneous sheet of paper upon her desk within 1 second after a baddie had been prying. I'd already carefully rooted through Mum's chest of drawers in her bedroom, to no avail. Her room smelled different after Dad finally moved out. More floral, less of feet. Bored one afternoon, I opened the wardrobe for the first time with my detective head on. After moving a pair of leather boots and a spare blanket, I spotted an ancient Clark's duck-egg blue shoebox, a sketch of runabout lace-up shoes on the side, while on the top, 3 1950s stiff-looking children posed jauntily. Liz was written in Mum's loopy script next to the figure of a girl walking a dog. Gingerly lifting off the lid, I discovered a stash of airmail letters and photos crammed in envelopes. I pulled out a black and white picture. A chubby baby with black curly hair and solemn dark eyes. Turning it over, Derek, 6 months, was printed in unfamiliar handwriting. "What are you doing?" Stephen asked, the photo slipping from my fingers and down a crack in the wardrobe trapped between the base and the back. "Looking for a blanket? We could have a picnic." When I next looked, the box and photo had vanished. In August, Dad unexpectedly flew back from Australia to live with us while Mum took part in a church retreat. She'd been unable to elaborate on her exact destination other than it was a few days away with another church group in Penzance. "I'll ring you once I'm there." "Is Pastor Michael's wife going?" I asked, a rancorous volcano ready to erupt any second. "No, Vanessa has to stay to look after their children." Mum had bitten her lip and narrowed her eyes. "Is anyone else going?" I asked airily, smiling, cheeks aching from the effort. "A few others." "Who?" Mum pretended not to hear and disappeared off to load the washing machine. By the time Dad arrived on the Wednesday before Mum's lunchtime pickup, I just wanted her to go and refused to wave her off. "Be good for your dad, no staying up late." "There was no one else in the van," Steve reported when he wandered back in. "I think they were picking people up on their way," said Dad, clearing his throat. Leafing through the radio times, I wanted to scream at him to do something, stop her going in case she wrecked our cosy, separate parent setup. But I didn't. Instead, I stomped upstairs and scrubbed under the rim of the toilet with his new toothbrush before being consumed by guilt, swilling it in Dettol to recompense. I pushed Tracy Bates's jibes out of my head. Mum was away with the church, not a singles club. That Friday lunchtime, Dad had meetings in Brighton. "Maybe don't mention to your mum I was out from 11. Stephen and I agreed to stay at home, same as when Mum worked her half-days at the spa. Loaded up with Tesco own-brand ready salted crisps and spaghetti hoops, we were frothing at the mouth for an unsupervised day. Stephen had seen a TV show about the Winter Olympic luge the day before, and he was keen to recreate it using Mum's black metal tea tray decorated with red roses. Sliding on the kitchen lino while I pushed wasn't quite the adrenaline rush he'd been hankering after. Not even Vaseline along the bottom increased the speed. "How about we try the stairs, but just start on step 3, I suggested sensibly. Nothing can go wrong from step 3. Stephen immediately took it to step 5. I waited with the sofa cushions at the bottom. After picking up some speed, Stephen made the giant leap to the top of the stairs, a vertiginous 14 steps. He pushed himself off and skidded down the slope in a dignified manner, landing on cushions, slamming into my open hands before he could bounce any further. I'm going to do it properly now, like they do on the luge. In retrospect, I had no idea why I didn't stop him. What I could remember was watching helplessly as he careered out of control, slamming into the wall, the tea tray crumbling like tinfoil before smashing into the banisters, the snapping sound more terrifying than the action itself. There was a moment's calm before the hallway filled with Stephen's high-pitched screaming. I scrambled to the 3rd step where his head and shoulders were pinioned between 2 shattered spindles, his arm crushed beneath him. I knew enough from watching Blue Peter not to move him. Stephen, shh, listen, I'm going to go next door to see if they can help. His howls rang out onto the road as I jumped over the low garden fence and cut straight to the Binghams' front door, fruitlessly banging. They were out. The family on the other side, the Hills, they were on holiday in Benidorm. Mr. Hills had asked Mum to water the garden twice a week. Benidorm was their mecca, and they reliably stayed in the same high-rise hotel, returning home with blistered skin and t-shirt tan marks that lasted until November. Stephen's wailing increased in volume, and I ran back inside. With only a succession of elderly neighbours in the remaining houses and strangers towards the very bottom of the street, I tried not to panic. There was a boy 2 years above at school at number 12, but I'd rather break my own arm than knock there. I wish I hadn't hated brownies. I'd stuck at it for just 3 months, leaving with a useless hostess badge. If only I'd bothered with the first aid badge instead. Tea-making skills were of no help in an emergency. Luckily, a policeman had given a talk at school before the holidays, all about stranger danger and how to call the emergency services if anyone dodgy approached you in a park asking if you wanted to see their puppies. I remembered wondering if gerbils were considered less threatening. By the time I got off the phone, Stephen had wound himself down to a sheep-like baaing, having turned the colour of watery blue skimmed milk. I feel sick, he whispered in between bleats. Are you going to puke? He shook his head, then promptly vomited all over himself. Thankfully, we hadn't had lunch, so it was only Ribena and a mulched-up Granny Smith. I'm sorry, he started to cry. By the time the ambulance arrived, I'd soaked his Airwolf t-shirt with Dettol and dabbed it as much as I could. Lord Baden-Powell would have been impressed. Remember, you tripped and fell, I hissed before opening the door. I wasn't going to prison for this. Where are your parents? Barry, the paramedic, asked after establishing our names. He cast his eyes around the hallway before kneeling on the 2nd step to examine Stephen, who whimpered when he gently prodded his arm. Mum's on a trip with the church and Dad's at work. He's in Australia, Stephen automatically piped up, groaning from the effort. He isn't, Stephen. That's only what we have to tell Grandma and Grandpa when he's not actually here, but he's here this week. So you have no parents here? We shook our heads. And when are they due back? Dad's home at 6:30, I think. By now another man had joined us, a mustachioed Ronald MacDonald with curly ginger hair. Hello, I'm Alex. It looks like we're going to have to take you both in. Well, we're not supposed to leave the house, I chipped in. Can you fix him here? I'm afraid not. He needs an X-ray and probably a cast. Oh no. How did it happen again? Alex asked doubtfully, eyeing us suspiciously. He fell. I want Stephen to tell me in his own words. I held my breath, sweeping my eyes up the wall. Stephen's erratic descent boldly scraped into the peach paintwork. I tripped and fell. How exactly? I was running. We were playing a game. I see. Okay. Well, that seemed to satisfy them both. Is there anyone we can call? You mentioned grandparents. Where are they? In Leicester. Please don't call them. We'll get in trouble. I changed tack. Would you like a cup of tea? My hostess badge skills were itching to create a diversion. There's custard creams too. No thanks. We have to call someone and let them know what's happened. I'm sure everything will be fine. Everything was about to be the exact opposite of fine. Chapter 7. The Secret's Out. Stephen was asleep on the sea of painkillers with his arm in a cast when Grandpa and Grandma arrived to collect us from Eastbourne's overflowing A&E department. Your brother has a clean break on his radius here, the criminally young doctor had explained, pointing halfway up his forearm. We had been left in a cubicle with nurses occasionally poking their heads in. I passed the time by counting up to 60 in bananas and then checking the clock above the nurse's station every 5 minutes to see if my method was accurate. The first 5 minutes had been slightly too fast, so I slowed down and switched to elephants. By half an hour, I was on a roll. Home time, a nurse sang, whipping the blue curtain open, clapping her hands to wake Stephen. Your ride has arrived. Thank you, nurse. So sorry you had to look after them for us. Grandma's deferential tone instantly set me on edge. What are you wearing, Cordelia? Aren't those shorts a bit too tight? Your foo-foo's on show. I picked at the white trim on the navy terry toweling beach shorts. I probably had outgrown them, but they were my absolute favourite. I dragged them out of the dustbin twice after Mum had consigned them there. They were a carbon copy of George Michael's shorts in the poster I'd bought in Brighton HMV. I only preferred George over Andrew because he was the real talent behind the duo. Everyone knew that. Though if Andrew had asked me on a date, no way would I have turned him down despite its unlawfulness. So your father's back from Australia? Grandma's inquiry strictly perfunctory, snapping me away from George and Andrew. Her main concern lay with holding a hanky against her nose. Herpes is rife in places like this. Yes, he is, I squeaked. How long is he home for this time? Grandpa asked. Until Mum gets back. He's flying back on Sunday night? Grandma was incredulous. That's a rather short trip with all the jet lag. I shrugged. Well, let's get you home and into something more suitable clothes. Has your mother told you about deodorant? What happened to this? Grandma appeared in the living room doorway, clasping the tray, a steely glint in her eyes. From the moment we returned from the hospital, she'd been banging pots around in the kitchen in an unprecedented display of domesticity. I clamped my hand over my mouth. I'd hidden the bashed-up thing by the bin, intended to throw it out later. I frantically tried to think of a brilliant lie, but low blood sugar tripped me up. They offered us a bourbon biscuits in A&E with a cup of sweet tea each.